There we are. Okay, these are the novel interventions that I have wanted to present to you. So today's one I'm going to pick is engaging in my own radical self disclosure with a client who terrified me. Uh, in some ways, I dread the retelling of this story because I'm going to have to visit my terror again, and that's never pleasant. The one comfort I have is that this is something I've written extensively as one of the chapters in the book I've been working on. So I can read it, and that'll soften the revisiting of it some because it's now in words and not in just in memories. So please bear with me. I will close down the screen sharing. There's no need for me to do that. And here I am. The title I put in this chapter is Trapped and Terrified. And here I go. One day in 1987, I was chatting with a colleague of mine in the hallway separating our offices. She told me that she was seeing a couple and she wanted to refer the male to me. She described him as being quite unhappy with his career and his family of origin and very irritable in his relationship with his girlfriend. The two were not married. To my office mate, he seemed to be a good candidate for psychological care. Could she refer him to me? I readily agreed, spoke to him on the phone, and found a time to meet with him. I soon learned that everything about Scott hurt. He had never been comfortable for any extended period of time in his entire 32 years of life on this planet. He could not get a pair of shoes that fit, so he complained endlessly about pains in his feet. He would buy shoes, take them home, wear them for a week or two, decide they had been fitted incorrectly, take them back to the department store, and wind up in a screaming fight with the credit manager. Sometimes security personnel had to escort him from the store. Scott hated his hair, his face, his waistline, and the sound of his own voice. He felt that his skin was, quote, too sensitive and tender, close quotes. He protested that he suffered from razor burn on his face and neck every day. He had prickly heat all over his body intermittently. He had gone to several dermatologists when his skin irritability had become too annoying, wound up feeling enraged that none of them could help him, accused them of being incompetent and of charging him exorbitant fees, and refused to pay their bills. He loved going to small claims court and fighting with collection agencies. When Scott came to see me, he announced with marked bitterness that he had no self. Nothing had any meaning or purpose. He had never accomplished anything, and he never would. He remembered himself as friendless through elementary school, junior high, and high school. He went to a year and a half of college, but he had dropped out because he was unmotivated. He did not know why he should not kill himself. He was certain that he was never going to amount to anything and that the painful, disappointing nature of his existence was going to go on without end. Nothing was ever going to be any better. Somewhere along the path, Scott had become quite adept at running darkroom equipment. Surprisingly enough, given his gloom and pessimism, when I met him, he informed me that he had a fairly well paying job with one of the major film processing labs in Southern California. He liked being left alone in the dark privacy of his workspace. Yet he could not sustain any real job stability. His then current job was the fourth such place to which he had worked in the past 10 years. My new client detested being given assignments under pressure when a supervisor did so. So there was a serious risk that Scott would erupt into a temper tantrum and storm off the job site. He was frequently late to work, left early when he felt like it, and called in sick on many occasions. If he were not such a creative and slick worker, he probably would have been canned from even more jobs than he already had been at the time I agreed to work with him. Scott never acknowledged any responsibility for any kinds of turmoil or episodes of angry feelings that occurred intermittently between him and his supervisors or coworkers. Whatever conflict existed, excuse me, whatever conflict existed was always someone else's fault, and his major diagnosis of his difficulties at work was that no one paid sufficient attention to him, appreciated him enough, mentored him enough, or wanted to form any personal relationship with him outside of work. Of course, the theme of personal blindness about his impact on others and the disowning of any responsibility for interpersonal tension and turbulence extended into Scott's life away from work as well. He had frequent confrontations about noise and parking disputes with the other residents of his apartment building, disputes that led to more screaming at and with other tenants, the manager, and sometimes even the police. As far as I could determine, my client had no friends and only a few superficial acquaintances. He was constantly angry at their lack of any greater involvement with him and professed to be baffled about why that should be. He described himself as being exceptionally kind, interested, fair minded, and thoughtful with others, while they were cold, disinterested, insensitive, and too busy to be concerned with him. For over 3 years prior to our meeting each other, somehow the young man managed to continue to be involved with a girlfriend, Donna. He spent 2 or 3 days a week with her, and she was a chronic disappointment to him. To hear him tell it, she was too involved with her family and insufficiently attentive to him. She was also too responsive to the needs of her friends. She did not take good enough care of him. She did not walk close enough to him when they were out together. She did not anticipate his needs without his having to remind her. She kissed badly. She did not know how to touch his penis properly. She was too fat. She was too boring. She did not stand up for herself. And I thought to myself that if she did, she would have left Scott. In sessions after our initial meeting, Scott poured out his litany of hurt, anger, despair, and suicidal ideation. The diagnosis was not hard to make. Trying to have any effect on him, though, was quite another matter. One of the biggest difficulties I encountered was his volatility. If I began a sentence that my client thought was going in some direction he resented, he immediately would interrupt me and talk over me. And he was not a good mind reader. His assumptions about what I was going to say to him were often wildly incorrect. In spite of this, I did at first manage some small advances. I was able to learn a little about what had undermined his capacity for human relatedness. Scott's father was an irritable, dour, and withdrawn man. He too dripped with constant complaints. In father's worldview, nothing was ever right with anything: the physical environment, the country, his acquaintances, his work, his wife, or his children. There was no love between the parents. For 40 years, they had simply clung together out of fear, insecurity, and habit. Scott's mother was not as constantly critical as was Scott's father. She was just in terror all the time. Her world was nothing but exceptionally dangerous. It caused her great anxiety and agony to know that at any moment someone might think poorly of her or her children, or object to something she was doing, and she exerted inordinate energy, attempting, often unsuccessfully, to prevent such a horror from happening. Her fears of public yays and public opprobrium were enormous. The young man had also had a terrible time in school. He was quite bright, but he was afraid to speak up in class. He was very fat when he was small, and he got teased and bullied a lot. No one wanted him on any teams. He was always chosen last, and other boys would tell him, "You can't play ball, you throw like a girl." My client had an older married sister, a brother in law, and two young nephews. While he was growing up, Sister frequently screamed at Scott, once threw him down the stairs, and their parents, according to his narrative, did little or nothing to stop her harassment of him. Sister and brother in law had become very Orthodox Jews, living in the Williamsburg section of Brooklyn. Brother in law did not work. He was a holy person who spent the day going to synagogue, reading the Torah, and saying prayers. Sister worked at a clerical job to support the family. She supplemented her meager income with food stamps. Scott claimed that their house was filthy inside. The adults were pack rats, and the sister and brother in law were frequently screaming at their offspring. During the time I was attempting to care for my client, the older of two nephews sometimes had phone conversations with Scott, pleading with him to allow him to leave home and come live with Scott here in California. It was Scott's mother, however, who seems to have been the most significant figure in my client's existence. And as a result of her fearfulness and timidity, she had abandoned him emotionally over and over again. It started at the very beginning of his life. In order to make it easier for others to be around him, she began socializing him, demanding from him neatness, orderliness, and inoffensiveness at the earliest possible ages, often earlier than he was developmentally ready to comply with her demands. As a consequence, she was frequently upset with him and scolded him harshly to try to get him to be good. In addition, he was rarely allowed to speak his feelings. His mother was on him all the time, quivering with fear that he might, quote, do something wrong, close quotes. If there were ever any conflict between Scott and his sister, himself and his father, himself and a chum, or himself and a teacher, Scott's mother would immediately align herself with the needs and points of view of the others, would tell Scott how he had been wrong, and would tell him exactly what he must do in order to squelch his own aspirations successfully, and instead to accommodate himself to the roles the others would have him play for them. Scott hated her. In the present, every time they spoke long distance, he wound up screaming at her. He wanted her to love him as he was, and she could not. She was too frightened. Or, looked at from another perspective, her teaching him how he should bend himself into a pretzel so that he would not offend anyone else was her distorted way of loving and protecting him. It should come as no surprise that when Scott came to his sessions, he always needed to be treated specially. The thermostat had to be adjusted. He needed water, tea, or a Tylenol from me. He wanted to close the blinds or open the blinds. He wanted the telephone ringer turned off. He wanted to plump the pillows on the chair. He wanted a ticking clock removed from the room. If there was any noise in an adjoining office, he might pound on the walls to signal to the occupants to be more quiet. He asked that special billing arrangements be made. He made requests to change the time of his regularly scheduled appointment over and over again. He wanted me, in contrast to his mother, to see his point of view unremittingly. I was never to take the side of the other in any of his disputes with others that he described to me. I did try to respond to Scott's, quote, special needs, close quotes, within the limits that were possible for me. I met as many of his demanding and idiosyncratic requests as I was able. He certainly did not reciprocate the consideration, but when I felt annoyed or frustrated with Scott, I would sometimes remember a movie I had seen in my youth, the film of Hemingway's For Whom the Bells Toll. I would silently quote to myself a line that actor Akim Tamirov, playing his role as a bandit, uttered frequently: "I will not provoke." To the best of my ability, then, I remained measured, thoughtful, and kind to him. I gave him sympathy that his body hurt so much. I gave him condolences that so many people failed him. I agreed with him that his life was almost intolerable. Yet I also told him that I believed in him and in his capacity to extend himself beyond its present cramped and hurtful limits. I found things about him that I could admire and appreciate, and I would tell him about those things too. I gave Scott an environment in which he could explore his rage and his disappointment and the fullness of his narcissistic wounds without fear of attack or of rejection. And still, it did not matter. And still, nothing observable happened. And still, Scott raged at me too, yelling that I did not give a shit about him, that the things I said were the stupidest fucking things anyone had ever told him, that I talked in riddles, and that my use of metaphors sucked. Sometimes, if he had been an absolute bastard to Donna in the face of some trivial misunderstanding between the two of them, and I had been insufficiently enthusiastic from his point of view about agreeing that she was an incredible shit and deserved to be pilloried, he would wind up screaming that it's just a fucking waste of time to see me and that I was taking his money and, quote, not doing a goddamn thing, quote, for him. Then he would suddenly storm out of my office, frothing at the mouth, yelling and slamming the doors as he went until his next appointment. Was anything useful happening? Was Scott's accusation that I was not doing anything for him accurate? I did not know. But there was a day that I remember that he asked me at the end of the session what he could call me. He said that he was uncomfortable thinking of me as Dr. Kovacs. In reality, he had never addressed me by any name whatsoever. I had been simply you or you stupid fuck. That moment was the first time he ever acknowledged that we may have some relatedness that required some form of address. I replied that he could call me whatever seemed best to him, anything that is except Art, a nickname I outgrew many years ago and which annoyed me whenever it was used. Then I really began to worry. The interchanges signaled to me that Scott might be getting too attached to me. I feared he might then have to find some reason to put me back in this devil pile of those who are or were ruining his life. Then he could draw away from me and repudiate me. I brooded that it might be best if I got ready, that it would be likely for him to find something about which to scream at me on the occasion of the next visit, and I would have to watch him go racing explosively out of my office again. And I remembered that he also just trusted me with the knowledge that I was his seventh therapist, stretching back to his elementary school days. God knows what went on between Scott and my predecessors. All of them had probably fled from him. I tried to comfort and prepare myself for what might come with a mantra I'd put together years ago while having other experiences with persons similar to Scott and reading the literature on the challenge of trying to do anything meaningful. The mantra was, I must not reject him, nor can I do anything that might feel to him as if I were trying to draw him closer. I must maintain a calm middle position, regardless of my own internal feeling states or the temptation to take some kind of defining action. I believe Scott could not bear the pain of another rejection. But intimate relatedness, on the other hand, probably felt to him as if it would lead to his annihilation. So, when threatened with caring, he would do anything possible to keep rage, resentment, and hatefulness in place to make sure no other would want to get very close to him, ever. He was certainly doing that with his girlfriend. And by the way, I thought she must be damaged in her own ways to want to bear and put up with that. My prediction, unfortunately for both Scott and for me, turned out to be hideously prescient. He came in for the next session as planned, and he began by asking me if I had read a certain article on, I don't remember what, in Psychology Today. He said he wanted my opinion about the article. I replied, I don't look at the magazine. Why don't you tell me about the article? He did so and then ended, what do you think of what the writer had to say? It was a trap. Stupidly, my default knee jerk response to what I had been taught to do years ago in graduate school was, why do you want to know? Why don't you tell me what got your attention in the article and why it's important to you? In hindsight, I'm ashamed of how I responded to him, and it immediately led to an explosion. You can go fuck yourself, Scott screamed at me. I already know what I think about the article. I want to know what you think about it. What the hell do I pay you for if all I'm going to get is you asking me my own thoughts? I already know my own thoughts too damn well. While he was yelling at me, Scott stood up. He swept all the items off the coffee table that separated us from each other. He sent them tumbling onto the floor. He then careened towards my exit door, reaching and pulling books off the bookshelf and slamming them also onto the carpet. The tantrum ended with his throwing open the exit door and banging it so hard behind him that it rattled the door frame as he escaped from my hateful presence. I wondered if I would ever see Scott again. I went home that evening and I told my wife Hermine what had been happening. She's a fellow professional and I always value her opinion when I feel lost or threatened. Her answer was quite curt: get rid of him. I can't do that. That's what everyone else in my profession does. If clients are too disturbed or too disturbing, we find ways not to take on the challenge of trying to work with them. Or if we're already engaged, we find excuses to dump them. He's already been through 6 others. I'm not going to re traumatize him with yet the next abandonment. My wife said, you're going to regret your decision. You don't have to do this. Well, I think I'll go on for a while more. I'm not ready to give up yet. Maybe it won't be so bad. And sure enough, the next day there was a voicemail from Scott. I didn't get my full session with you yesterday. When's the next time you can see me? I saw him the very day after the call and continued to do so for 2 more years. After the first year of those sessions ahead, oh, excuse me, and the first year of those sessions ahead was sheer hell for me. From week to week, I never knew what the next horror was going to be. After a while, though, I became a bit wiser. I was able to deal with Scott seeking to trap me by asking for comments about various things that had caught his eye. It was a challenge to discover how to reduce the dissonance between us, stirred by his seemingly innocent questioning of me. The actual selections about which he wanted to hear something from me tended to be either articles in books or books focused on feminism that he simply thought was a crock of shit, or they were articles about psychology and psychologists that were proof to him that we in my profession were a bunch of stupid assholes. When he continued to ask me if I believed in the crap that he had read, that he had wanted to share with me, though, I at last found the way forward to make it less likely he would explode. On my path towards framing a better response, earlier I tried to miss mid position, one that was not working either. The earlier response might have been, I'll tell you what I understand about what you're relaying to me. I'll share whatever I think about it. And then you can tell me back what it all means to you. That modification hadn't succeeded at all. Inquiring about Scott's own thoughts, even in this roundabout way, only led to more temper outbursts. So at last I moved on. In the end, I simply answered his questions as fully and thoughtfully as I could without asking that he share anything at all with me in return. Sometimes he would say something, but most of the time he kept his own cards close to his own chest, even when I lay mine down. The answers, of course, still brought a tirade of scorn, including, is that the crap you teach your graduate students? That's why the members of your profession are so full of shit and ought to be exterminated. Rage, contempt, and derision were heaped on me, but the tantrums and storming out of the office eased off. Soon there came a shift in the content of our interactions. Now a litany of complaints about the meaningless of seeing me began to be uttered with increasing intensity. You're not doing a damn thing to help me. I don't know why I waste my time and money coming here. I should take you to court for malpractice and a refund of the fees I paid you. You're incompetent and ought to be punished. Scott, you have every right to protest, and I'm obligated by law to let you know how to report me to the Board of Psychology if you want to file a complaint. That information's posted in the waiting room. Fuck you, I mean it. You're not doing anything for me. Why should I keep on seeing you and paying you? Whether you decide to stay or leave is solely in your hands. You have to decide whether it has any value for you to come here. I'll always trust your judgment to make a good decision for yourself. Ah, come on. Can you name a damn thing that you do for me? I dare you. I know you can't. I took the bit. I'll tell you what I provide to you. You matter to me. Your suffering often moves me. I always welcome you with kindness and interest to the best of my limited ability. I never ask you for anything for myself. I try to offer you thoughtful companionship, although in your eyes I fail in that all too often. I wish I had a magic wand to take your distress away, but I do not. In spite of that, I'll never give up on you. I believe that over some long time to come, you can find your way out of some of your hurt in which you're treading water. I'll not reject you, nor will I ever try to control you. As long as you want my time and attention, they'll be yours. And I don't think you're sharing your life with many other human beings. I don't think you are sharing your life with many other human beings who can say what I've just said to you and mean it. In retrospect, my words of commitment to Scott might have been a move too far towards inviting him to more intimacy than he could stand. My evidence is that after I said what I just quoted, his conduct in the real world began to worsen. And in the consulting room, he became more hateful and frightening for me to bear over the weeks following my pronouncement. First, he got fired for his job for erratic attendance and for missing critical deadlines assigned to him for the completion of various work projects. Next, he began to develop a serious driving phobia, particularly on the freeways. He'd have to swerve to make sudden exits on the nearest off ramp while he struggled with a panic attack. Finally, after losing his employment, he persuaded the psychiatrist he'd been seeing to sign Social Security disability papers for him because, as he told me, I'm too fucked up to work. I can't stand the crappy jobs that I'm able to do. And I don't think I'll ever be able to work and do any work again with my lack of a college education and my awful work record. I brooded about him a lot. I tried to comfort myself with some bit of theory I had learned in graduate school. I remembered things I had read about negative therapeutic reactions. Trained as I was in the tradition of psychoanalysis, one of the beliefs is that in a badly damaged person who previously had shown only the stigmata of the psychoses over serious and crippling character problems, the appearance of one of the neuroses, in this case is driving phobia, was actually a step forward, some hopeful thing that would be seen on the path to recovery. To this day, I do not know if that assertion is wise or silly, but it was a comfort to me to remember that theory at the time I was listening to Scott. And while I was concerned about these more than troublesome developments and how his life was being lived outside my office, his behavior towards me was also becoming increasingly threatening and terrifying for me. First, he began to talk with increasing insistence about becoming suicidal. There's no point to going on. I'll never work again. I can't drive any distances anymore. I'll just use the car to kill myself. I know what I'll do. I'll just swerve it into the path of oncoming traffic at 50 miles an hour. I know that'll kill me, and hopefully I'll be able to kill a bunch of the assholes that make my life so miserable every day and take them out with me. What would be good Oh, what would be good to take out and kill would be a mother and father with two kids in the back seat, just going about their business. I'll destroy them too. I hope there's an explosion and a big ball of fire. He toyed with his daydream for many weeks. He toyed with me too by telling me things like, I came very close to doing it last night. I was driving on Pacific Coast Highway. Someone swerved into my lane and I just had to pull over and move aside myself. I just wanted to speed up, give him nowhere to go, and kill us both. Then he paused. Aren't you going to do anything about me? You're supposed to keep me from killing myself. I waited a few beats before I answered. My thoughts were, my God, he's playing Russian roulette with his car. I really think he's going to do it. What do I do? Do I send the pet team to his house? That won't work. He'll be very calm and hold himself together when the authorities show up. He'll tell them he was mad at me and making up stories. Just a mean joke of his. He's very bright. He'll be very reasonable. They'll just go away. Or they'll take him for a 72-hour hold. He'll again keep himself together and be released. But then he'll hate me even more intensely for sending cops to his home or for having him hospitalized. And that will only increase the possibility that he'll kill himself. But this time he won't tell me anymore about contemplating it. He'll just do it. I didn't speak those thoughts aloud. What I said instead, though, was I've never been like other members of my profession. I've always believed your life was truly yours. If it's unendurable, I respect your right to dispose of it. And I don't believe any of us can prevent you from committing suicide if you made a final decision to do it. People who are hurting unbearably always find a way to end their lives, even in prisons or in mental hospitals. I don't want you to die, but that's a selfish thing of mine. Our conversations are important to me. I continue to believe you'll not have to live in hell for the rest of your life if you just stay alive until death becomes your natural end. I'm convinced you'll have some years of greater peace and some kinds of fulfillment you can't even glimpse yet. But please, you must not stay alive for me or anyone else. You decide whether you are or aren't going to kill yourself. After that, Scott shifted both the suicide mechanism and the nature of his suicide threats. I bought again this week. I don't need to use the car. I might not succeed in dying in a car accident, only crippling myself. So when I get myself ready, I'll just put the muzzle to my mouth, pull the trigger, and blow my brains out. That'll do it for sure. And I'll just be there dead until I stink with decay and it gets so bad that one of my neighbors calls the cops and they find my corpse. And you know what? I'm going to leave a suicide note in my pocket. The note's going to hold you responsible for my death. It'll say that you failed me, you were my last hope, but you were so stupid and so incompetent that with every session, you made my life worse. You made me see that there wasn't any hope at all. You've left me no alternative but to die. Then so be it, I responded slowly and quietly. I was so torn. Did I really believe that Scott had purchased a gun? I wasn't at all sure. I didn't know. Was he serious? Was he just taking cruel pleasure in tormenting me? I didn't know that either. My intuition kept whispering to me, though. It was whispering to me that I needed to hold my calm center and just let the horrible storm continue to swirl around me. But I didn't know if I could bear it. And another internal voice was telling me, saying that I was wrong. He was going to do it. I would get into trouble, and I was an idiot. After all, I had written my doctoral dissertation on denial and fantasy, and my stupid insistence that my intuition was telling me the threat was not real and that I could hold on for a while longer was a perfect example of denial. After that, my time with my client got even worse. The cursing, erupting, trashing my office, and storming out after only 10 or 15 minutes of a session resumed. In addition, now Scott's threats shifted from suicide to murder. First, he was going to murder me. You deserve to die for ruining my life. Don't ever feel safe. One night you'll come out into the lower parking lot to get into your car. I'll be there where you won't see me. I'll come up behind you and I'll blow your brains out with my pistol. I answered, I know the agony of your life is almost unbearable. I'll do whatever I'm able to give you my caring, even though it's so inadequate. Something even more hideous followed in subsequent sessions. No, I'm not going to kill you. That's too easy. I want you to suffer for the rest of your life, just as I have to suffer. So I'm going to kill your wife. I know where you live. Your home address is on some of the magazines in your waiting room in the magazine rack. I'm going to go to your home while you're at work. I'll ring the doorbell. When your wife answers and asks who it is, I'll say that I'm one of your patients, that I was headed for the neighborhood and that you asked me to take something to her on my way, something you wanted her to have at home. When she opens the door, I'll shoot her and kill her. I'll pull her body back inside the house and then I'll leave. When you get home that evening, you'll find her bloody corpse. My heart pounded as I listened. I began to panic. Was this real? Was this a nightmare I was having? Could I ever wake up? Did I need to warn my wife? She would be in unbearable agony if she knew what I was hearing. Maybe I should call the police. I don't trust myself. My stupid idealistic belief that I must go on being steady and calm in the face of his furious chaos is not sensible. It's not noble. No, I'm a deer in the headlights and someone is going to be destroyed. Nevertheless, a fatalistic lassitude overcame me. I even considered that the purpose of my life was to die, attempting to heal a raging and hopelessly damaged client, and that either my wife or me was about to die to fulfill that purpose. For too many moments, I was speechless. I finally said, I've heard your agony so clearly. The pain is almost overpowering. You've helped me to join you in your unbearable misery. I'll do what I can to keep standing by your side. And Scott stormed out of the office, slamming the door as he went. Many months earlier, I had taken practical steps to manage to keep on seeing Scott. His tirades and his door slamming were more than could be tolerated by others in our office suite. We had very good soundproofing, but the noise still disrupted other people's ability to work. So I had taken to seeing him to seeing Scott at 7 p.m. on Tuesday evenings, the time when everyone else had gone home and the premises were locked. I would have to buzz him into the building when he arrived for his sessions with me, and everyone else, it was dark and silent. The office I had occupied during the period I was attempting to work with Scott had floor to ceiling windows, and the ones on the east side of my consulting room overlooked the entrance to the building's parking lot. Week after week, I would pace back and forth in increasing agitation, looking down to see when his Ford Taurus would arrive. I would plead with the universe for a temporary deliverance in the form of his not showing up for his appointment with me. Once in a while, he did fail to appear, and then I would be seized with a wave of relief and go home. But if nothing else, Scott was very dedicated to keeping his time with me. He almost always entered the driveway precisely at 5 minutes to 7. Then my heart would pound as I waited. My armpits would sweat. I would be seized with waves of terror. He would call me up on the automated system that would allow me to let him enter. I would buzz him in, dreading what I would come to believe would be an escalating outburst of hatred. Even it would be a time when one or another of us would go over the brink of destruction. On a particular evening, now so present in my mind as I write this, I knew I couldn't take it anymore. While I'd been pacing and waiting, I searched my mind for some way I could rescue myself. In what was probably an interval, only a few moments, my thoughts cascaded wildly. Tonight, I'll tell him that it's time for the two of us to stop seeing each other. I can do that. Our code of ethics says that we have a positive responsibility to end care if we believe that our efforts are not producing any benefit. Scott is probably correct. Am I doing any fucking thing that's making anything better? He's having a negative therapeutic reaction and it's getting worse. I owe it to him to stop. Besides, our ethics code also say that we can terminate care if we've been threatened with harm. You stop it, Arthur. That's just a crock of shit. You promised yourself you were going to bear in no matter what. Don't quit now. He's still alive and you're still alive. You have to go on. In fact, our ethics code also says that we mustn't abandon a client. You can't just break it off. Where would you refer him? No one else will have him. He'll storm away from any clinic if he'd even take a referral to one. If you reject him, he's even more likely to kill himself. When all these ruminations had run their course, some new thoughts about how to proceed formed themselves in my mind at last. Scott did show up. In great terror, I did buzz him into the building of my office that evening. I don't know why I bothered coming tonight. This is just a waste of time. Scott, I'd like to tell you something. Before I do, though, I want to make a request. Sometimes when I start to say a sentence, you interrupt me with your eagerness to be heard. Could you control that tonight for a while? I have something to describe to you that may take me 3 or 4 minutes to relate, and I don't want to lose even my own thoughts. So if you just give me that space to tell you what I want to tell you without interrupting me, it might make some difference to you. At least I hope so. Go say whatever crap you're going to say. And Scott kept the commitment he was making to contain himself and to listen. I then proceeded to tell him about how I spent my years in elementary school. A Jewish kid who had to walk home and pass a Catholic church and a parochial school on the way. I describe how knots of Catholic boys would surround me, calling me kike and Christ killer. They would egg each other on, and on occasion, one or another of them would beat on me. I had had my nose broken once. Another time, one of them had some rope. I had been tied up with ropes and dragged off into the nearby snowing woods and left to struggle to get myself free and to get home. I was so ashamed that I couldn't defend myself that I never told anyone what was happening to me. I told Scott that these experiences had left me with a terrible streak of cowardice and an extreme fear in the face of any possible threat of physical violence. When I was frightened in this fashion, I froze. I could not think. I had been experiencing his outbursts in a way that stirred these old wounds and old memories. I was very sorry I couldn't do better for him in the face of his threats, but that my mind just went numb often when he became so angry or so belittling. Even though my client had been silent, as soon as I paused, he was ready. Why are you telling me all this shit? Don't give me your damn psychobabble. But his words were a few notches quieter than his usual outbursts. In those few moments, I was surprised with myself. A startling new sets of thoughts had suddenly arisen in my consciousness in the small interval immediately following the sharing of my memories with Scott and listening to his first words back to me. Scott, I think I have a new understanding about what's been going on between us. I think it's more than possible that we become characters in a memory drama about your early life. Only I've been cast in the part of a very young Scott, helpless, terrified, being screamed at often, fearing for his life, and unable to stop the barrage. You've never talked to me about those moments much, but I'm now pretty sure you're carrying some horrendous memories that you don't want to visit. You've been trying to signal to me about those hideous experiences, though, doing it through our living out the miserable interactions we've been having with each other. This time, though, you are the overpowering bully, and I am the small, helpless one. I'm so sorry it took me so long to see all of this and what it meant. I failed you. I have indeed been stupid, and my stupidity has been harmful to you. I'll try to make it up to you. Scott answered, You're full of shit. Where do you get such crazy ideas? This was said even more softly than were his previous comments, and my terror began to subside and continued to do so over the several months that were left in our knowing of each other. And here are some of my thoughts that kept reverberating in me after that night. Thoughts of homage to those of my profession who had preceded me. I remember that a comment that Sigmund Freud had made a century and a half ago in the text of one of his lectures, reproduced as an article in his collected works. He noted that the test of whether or not something the analyst has said to the client has whether it's been apt and useful do not depend on whether or not the client agrees with the formulation. What is important is whether the remark begins to loosen something and start an opening forward into the change for the better. My words, as I shall note below, certainly did that. I remember certain snatches of writing from Erik Erikson about the value of play in the lives of children and even adults. Children engage in play for two important purposes: trying on new roles, new possibilities in play as a preparation for challenges to come, and repeating trauma over and over again in the attempt to grasp its nature and to master it. The latter often involves the shifting of roles, as when a child who's had a painful experience with a doctor's visit plays doctor with dolls or stuffed animals and inflicts on them what has been endured by the child. I remember many articles about what is called identification with the aggressor as a means of overcoming helplessness, appropriating the look and behavior of the tormentors and posturing as if one were a member of the tormenting group, Some of the articles were about interviews with those in the concentration camp. Cast off articles of guards' clothing would be stolen. Some would dress in that garb, and they would bully and torment their fellow prisoners. And I finally remembered other articles by those in a subgroup of psychoanalysts whose members referred to themselves as the object relations movement. They write often about a phenomenon to which they refer as projective identification. In the therapeutic interaction, particularly with seriously wounded clients like Scott, if the therapist is successful in making a good working empathic bond with the client, the therapist is at some risk. Outside of his or her awareness, the client's internal chaos and pain flows into the personhood of the therapist. The client becomes more peaceful as the therapist internally holds and has to deal with the hideous turmoil that is being offloaded from the client to the therapist. And on Scott and I went. And in some ways, his life began to improve, even though he never gave me and I never asked for any credit. Or did any of his improvements matter at all? As I began to feel less frightened, new ideas occurred to me. I encouraged him to tell me more about moments of persecution in his life. I did not get very far. I believe we were separated before he became willing to tell me everything. One day, I remembered Scott's memory about not being picked to play ball because he threw like a girl. So I went to a sporting goods store and I bought myself a pitcher's mitt and a regular mitt for Scott and a few baseballs. I made sure to break the mitts in as I had learned in childhood. I oiled them with neatswood oil, placing a ball in each mitt at just the right spot for catching it, then binding the assemblage with twine and leaving it alone for a week or so that the catching pocket could be properly created, and then the glove would naturally seek the right form that would make catching most reliable. When all was ready with the baseball paraphernalia and my client showed up for his next appointment, I said, Scott, you told me you'd been teased as a kid because you supposedly threw like a girl. I'd like to see how you throw. If it's really a problem, I'll help you overcome it at last. Maybe that's one small thing I could do for you. I went to one of the cupboards under the counter in my office and took out the gear. For once, Scott was speechless. Here, this mitt and the balls are yours. Please keep them, but I'll keep the catcher's mitt. If you're willing, let's go out in the alley behind the building. We'll play catch, and we can talk about anything you want to share with me today while we throw the ball back and forth. And while we do that, I can see how you throw, and maybe I can help you correct whatever is the arm motion you use. Are you nuts? No, I want to be helpful in any way I can. Your father and friends should have helped you to gain the skill you needed, but obviously that didn't happen. It would be my honor to teach you at last. We went out in the alley. I saw that Scott certainly did exhibit a sidearm, limp arm way of throwing when he tossed the ball to me. He couldn't deliver it with any force. So we heaved it back and forth. While we did, I was able to get him to throw differently and more effectively. A few months after this experience, the movie The Field of Dreams was released. When I saw it, I wept with nostalgia and longing at the last scenes where the almost universal yearning that boys have to play catch with their dads was so poignantly explored. The archetypical male bonding experience in this culture. But my father died when I was 12. And without even knowing it, I had blundered into trying to help Scott to repair the damage that his critical, overbearing father had done to him. While we played catch, I heard more about his troubles with Donna. His lament that she was so disappointing went on and on. But wonder of wonders, on that day, he told me he had decided to propose to her. It was a calculating move on his part. He said he would make do with her even if she was not anyone he would be thrilled to have as his wife. It was time to marry if he wanted children. They had been together for more than 3 years, so he was going to do it. Besides, who else would ever have him? No woman who was at all desirable would be interested in him. Oh my goodness, I still have ages to go, and it feels like my time is up. So I'm going to mark this point. I'm going to call a halt to it, and I will continue there next week, and I will throw the floor open for now to have your responses to this most bizarre, most unpleasant, most unusual case.
Next time, Arthur, just listen to Hermine.
Speaking of Hermine, if he was threatening to go to the house and to shoot her with a gun, did you believe him? And if you did you feel that there was a duty to report him at that point, or a need to report him, Arthur?
I certainly visited that as a responsibility. And again, what it signified to me, if I was to do that, that I would have blown up and ruined my therapeutic alliance with him, and maybe have increased his despair that nobody could tolerate him, and increased the likelihood that he would commit suicide.
Well, but then, in some ways, how I would assume you didn't quite believe that he would follow through with that
I
threat.
didn't know.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if you were 100% sure, I imagine there would have been police calls to the police, but you took a calculated risk.
There was, I think, a slight majority believed he was just torturing me. A slight majority believed he didn't even own a gun.
Yeah.
With all that you endured from him, week after week, day after day,
Oh,
how come there was never a thought that that you would quit, or that you would fire him, or that in some ways you would say, this is not working, perhaps you can find a better therapist to work with you?
then I thought I would be slapped with a lawsuit for client abandonment.
No, if you felt in some ways, if he was saying, well, you're not doing him any good, this is meaningless.
That doesn't matter. I would still be slapped with a lawsuit for client abandonment.
But I guess I'm kind of moving to the part, kind of like where in some ways that I don't think that you ever, quit on your clients.
No,
And
I leave them to decide when to separate from me.
Yes. And you were going to endure all this and conceivably find meaning in it, I guess.
Somehow.
Which you did.
Yes. I have no idea if he showed up again at this point in my life. This was fairly early in my career. What the hell would I do with him? I don't know if I would see him now. I really don't.
Yeah, it takes so much energy. I've had some similar cases, and it's exhausting. It takes a toll on you. It takes a toll on your relationships.
One of the things I kept saying to myself over and over again, if I don't bear into this, who the hell's going to see him? Where does he get anybody who's going to work with him? That's really a challenge for the whole profession. I am so aware of my colleagues' willingness, if they don't feel some kind of simpatico and graciousness about a relationship with a client, they refer them help. They'll just get rid of them. And so I'm sure there's a group of people out there who are being referred from person to person to person because nobody will put up with them. Where are they supposed to get care? And why the fuck do I care Where they're gonna get care. I'm stuck with it myself.
Mm.
I want to be a member of a profession where people can get care. And we just don't dump them because we find them unpleasant.
They threaten to kill us.
Or even if they threaten to kill us.
It's interesting in some ways. In the very beginning, when you described him, you know, it reminded me of something that all of my children grew up with, which was Fred Rogers and
Oh yeah.
Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood.
Yes.
And he sings a very kind of like a very kind and a
Yes.
telling song, which is "You Are Special."
Yes.
And in some ways, it seems like that this was something that he never felt from his father.
Yes. No, what he got from his father constantly was that he was a piece of shit. Hmm. I assume neither of you have the insanity that I have, and I am envious. Oh God. But you'll see as I finish my story, in the long run, I think that knowing me did help his life improve. He never became a wonderful, stellar character, but you'll see here that some good things happened as he moved on.
Be interesting if he recontacted you to learn about how his life developed after seeing you for the first time.
Well, you'll see he moved away, and I did have some continuing contact with him for a while after he made his move. But then he's gone out of my life now. And I haven't heard from him in more than 3 decades at this point. I don't even know if he's still alive.
Were you relieved when he left?
Yes.
I felt relief when I had one client yell "fuck you" and slam my door and walk out. It's like, okay.
You weren't worried he was about to sue you or report you to the Board of Psychology?
Well, it was a referral from you, so
Oh,
figured he'd get his
oh,
point.
I know who that was. Yeah. Oh, well, that was just par for the course. I'm surprised he didn't come back after that.
Oh, I think it happened more than once.
Yeah. That's just part of the thing you go around with him.
Yeah.
And I remember him too because I worked with him for a period of time. What was strange is it was very unclear often what the trigger was, why he was getting so angry and about what.
Exactly. It would come out of nowhere.
It came out of nowhere. Yeah.
Did
Some
you ever confer
internal.
with the psychiatrist, Arthur, on this patient?
No, he wouldn't give me the name of the psychiatrist. That was part of the game he was playing with me.
Mm.
I'm not going to tell you who I'm seeing. You don't have my permission to talk to my psychiatrist. Now, the person I hated was my office mate who referred him to me. That was the person I was really angry with. Uh, I'll tell you one of the worst minds I was experiencing too. I have a set of beliefs about what's necessary for marriages to stay vital and lively and worth living and worth enduring. And one of those beliefs is there should be transparency and there should not be secrets. And I kept the secret of the death threats from my wife for a long period of time. And I knew there would be terrible turbulence and I would be in a two front war if I told her what he was threatening. My wife would be very frightened and she would start demanding that I get rid of him and I protect her and I wouldn't blame her. I was playing fast and loose with her life in order to preserve my relationship with the client. I don't know if that was a wise thing or a stupid thing. It just was. I did it. It wasn't until he was long gone for quite a period of time before I acknowledged to her what I had potentially put her through. And then I had to deal with the aftermath of my taking that risk with her life. Hmm.
How'd you explain that one?
Poorly.
Very carefully.
I made her a promise I'd never do that again.
Good call.
All right, it's time today. We will get back into this case next week.
Okay,
Bye.
Bye,
bye.
guys.
Have a good weekend. Bye
You
now.
too.